Welcome, everybody, to a special episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast covering Poker League television. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Ben on Poker Stars.
And I'm your other host, East Coast Sam. We're going to be bringing you two of the biggest league shows that were on television. First, we're going to be talking about Poker Superstars 3, not to be confused with the video game. We're talking about the TV show here. And then we're going to be talking about Premier League. Both of these, we're going to be talking about season 3 of Poker Stars and then season 7 of Premier League. These are the most recent seasons. Both of them have been off the air for a little while now. So we're kind of giving a little bit of a trip down memory lane. Premier League was more recent. Poker Superstars, I think, was back in 2006. So really going back down the memory lane in a lot of different ways. But I'm excited about this one. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, we've mentioned how we used to define poker and television to two halves: cash games and tournaments. And really, leagues are kind of that third branch that maybe like rarely seen cousin from out of state that comes into your holiday gathering. Poker leagues being that typically every player ponies up a entry fee. They often have to be invited to be a part of this league. It's a very exclusive club oftentimes when they're selecting who plays in it. And then they usually will play a series of heats. Each player plays multiple matches against a randomized pool of the player in the tournament in a sit and go tournament style. And then based on their finish, they accumulate points, and then you might win some money for each point you have, or those points get used in a later in the season to determine kind of the final table or the final. They have eliminations, and then slowly you put under one winner, and the winner takes the lion's share of money. And you can still earn money along the way if you win individual matches or win points, so that you have some chance to not just strike out and earn the bagel on a match in a league. And both of these shows we'll be discussing, they underwent evolution year to year, and so I felt it was appropriate to only focus on the last season where they kind of had the most chance to kind of perfect the formula. And that might not be related to why the shows ended on those seasons, but just because the poker world changed. Ironically, the timing of both of these shows ending kind of coincides with a certain maybe background sponsor kind of having a different situation. So maybe that's more related to why these shows didn't last beyond their runs on television. So again, I grew up with one of these shows, Poker Superstars. I saw season 2 on, I think it was Fox Sports Network. It was often airing like after school, and I would watch most of the heats. And I was only like 13 or so when, so I didn't really know what was good or bad. So I was just happy to watch it. And then Poker Premier League, my relationship was that I had seen just various clips on YouTube of individual hands from all across the show's history, not just from the later seasons. And so I kind of had watched the viral hands of those shows. What was your history of these two shows, Sam?
Yeah, same with you. I mean, I remember watching Poker Superstars when I was younger, and I didn't just throw in the Flash game as a joke at the beginning. I remember playing that a lot on shockwave.com back in the 2000s, little Flash game. And, they have music, and they'd be like, you're playing with Antonio Esfandiari and Jennifer Tilly. And it's just, AIs, of course. But yeah, I mean, I remember the show fairly well. Probably the most famous episode of Poker Superstars is when Gus Hansen, who needed to get first place, decided to go all in each and every single hand, regardless of what his cards were. I mean, that's made the rounds on YouTube a bunch of times. I've seen that episode several times. But yeah, I mean, beyond that episode, I don't quite remember individual episodes or so on. So this was sort of an interesting way to bring it back. And then, yeah, Premier League, as you mentioned, I've really just seen it a bunch of compilations, mainly just sort of Vanessa Selp's fail compilations, even though I don't think she's that bad of a poker player. So yeah, I mean, this was a new experience watching this for the first time. And again, trying to get all the point structures and stuff together in my head, because very complicated, I'll just say, and leave it at that.
Yeah, League Poker, just as an audience member, it's really kind of a new take on watching poker, because you see players make decisions based upon a number of variables that wouldn't exist in a traditional tournament or in a cash game, as far as I have to finish in this spot or better, or this person has to do this spot or worse, or if I'm going to play against him, how does that affect my play style later on? And so there's a couple different levels that mostly play a factor in Premier League watching, less so on Superstars because they play more matches per player, so there's a little bit more of a dilution factor there. And it's funny how these two shows that we're discussing can have an overall fairly similar basic skeleton, with the actual organs of the tournaments and tables far different, and it creates a large gap in quality from comparing good to bad here. I think we'll be discussing Superstars Invitational 3 first, and hopefully you agree with me that that show is significantly inferior to Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, not just in terms of the content we see, but also the production style. I mean, both of these shows have essentially just cameras around a table. You have commentators over the top. Fairly straightforward. It's stuff that you've seen before. But yeah, it just comes off as very cheap. The set doesn't look very good. The chips don't look very good. Howard Lederer is one of the commentators. And I mean, just off the bat right there, given what we know about Howard Lederer as time's gone on, it's kind of hard to enjoy his commentary. But also, he just sounds like he's clearly reading off of a teleprompter. He just doesn't come off as a very natural spokesperson. So his commentary is not too interesting.
I mean, he's very articulate. I think
yes, he is.
He's kind of has a very calming, almost a Nick Schulman kind of calming announcing presence. So I didn't mind that. And actually, Annie Duke does join in the booth after the first couple of episodes, ironically. And so, again, another figure of much controversy in the poker world, 15 years ago or so. But I think going from the top here, the structure of Poker Superstars Invitational 3, they had made some adjustments from seasons 1 and 2. Season 1 was a very different beast compared to 2 and 3, but 2 and 3 are the most comparable. 24 players pony up $50,000 to enter. Each player plays 5 matches to earn as many points as possible. So there's a total of 20 matches in a 6-max formats. You would have Chris Rose, Howard Lederer in the booth, Mary Strong as the interviewer. Each heat, again, 6 max. Each player begins with 300,000 chips, which ironically Premier League would do as well, which is kind of funny. But the biggest and most essential difference is that the blinds are 10K and 20K to start, which means they have 15 big blinds on level 1. Absolutely nutty, which means it significantly hampers the quality, style, and poker techniques on display in every single heat. They fall into these sort of monotonous routines of pretty much all in pre-flop poker for the most part, or maybe 2-bet pre-flop, 3-bet all in, 2-bet folds. I mean, that's pretty much, I would say 2/3 of the hands are like that in these episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the producers said to themselves, all-ins are exciting, when players have their tournament life at stake. And that's why they kept the stack so small. But it's just, I've said before how much I hate it when episodes are just shove fests and you only just get bust out hands. I mean, there's the second episode, jumping ahead a little bit here, but the second episode is just like, it's just all shoves and bust outs. I mean, it's just insane how bad that episode is. But it's the case with a lot of the action in all 4 episodes that we've seen. Very disappointing stuff, because all these players are pretty good. Like, they really have a murderer's row in every episode of very good, solid players. It would be nice to really see them play poker.
And a couple other things related to this particular program. The chip counts are shown very regularly, pretty much before every commercial break, and sometimes even after commercial breaks. And so that's maybe like 7 or 8, even 9 times they're shown, which is pretty crazy. There are like these little bleachers next to in that same poker room where some of the other players who aren't in that match can watch. There is you win $10,000 if you win 1 heat, and of course the 10 points are very valuable when you're trying to make the Super 16, which was the next phase of the tournament of the league, where the 24 players go down to 16, and then those 16 play various matches in the semifinals, and then they boil down to heads up play until you get down to a winner. And the more points you have, the more chips you have to begin. Which I would, I guess, assume that with the blinds starting where they are, hopefully you'd really want to have at least like 600,000 chips to have 30 big blinds to start off on level 1 of that right. At that point. And one of the biggest sins also is that there are often ad breaks after an all-in has been called pre-flop, but before the run-out. So you're just like, let's just get it over with. I mean, they don't really milk each card. It's pretty quickly when they play the cards up, but it's really a pain when you just want to see what happens with that hand. You got to go to a break and then come back and, we're back here. There's an all-in. We'll see what happens. And then most episodes end with the Hooters bust out of the match, which is, again, just kind of a repeat showing of someone who busted out in maybe somewhat dramatic fashion. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to be like, you had 5 big blinds, you'd be busted. No big deal. He's out in 4th point, 3 points. Okay, moving on. Like, no.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few interview segments, but none of them are very substantial. Jennifer Tilly will talk about how everybody doesn't like her and that makes her feel good. And Sfandiari will talk about something. But my favorite moment in every single episode was this very odd, I don't know what to call it, promo segment for Golden Nugget. It would happen just like in the middle of the episode, like Jeff Rose just started talking. The Golden Nugget is Las Vegas's premier casino destination. If you want great food and great music in an informal setting, you go to the Golden Nugget. And it's just weird. Like, I understand you have a sponsor and you got to promote their stuff, but generally it's a patch on a player's arm or something in the background, like a billboard or something. They'll actually like stop the show in the middle of nowhere and just have this promo. It's just very strange.
I should clarify that the Golden Nugget was where this league was based out of in Las Vegas, and the actual like promo for it was a little bit different. Sometimes it would cover on the food or on the location, so it was maybe a shot of the tables in the casino. So it wasn't quite the exact same footage each time, but they did repeat a few times too. But for these first 4 episodes, I think they'd had like 3 different versions, so there is one repeat there.
Yeah.
And so again, 6 max, so 6 players. The first 4 episodes, they don't repeat any players, so everyone plays 1 match before anyone plays their second match, which is different from Poker Premier League, actually, given the structure there. And so Sfandiari, who was in season 2 and finished last place, kind of headlines that table along with a couple other players: Jennifer Tilly, Joe Hashim, Cindy Violette, Mimi Tran, and Carlos Mortensen. And again, there's really not a ton of table talk in a lot of these heats, even though you have some relatively talky players at the table, which is unfortunate. And I don't know if you noticed, Sam, is that there's different chip colors that they have. They have the yellow 1K, the white, I think 5K, and then the green. I'm sorry, the orange 25K, and the blinds are 10 and 20, and so you really shouldn't have 1K chips, and not a single player uses those 1K chips ever. I think maybe once in like episode 4, someone had so few chips that they put in like 10 of them for like a blind or something. But it is unbelievable how they would even use these chips, and they don't color them up or anything. They just keep these. It was the most baffling choice I've ever seen.
I think they just wanted to have big piles of chips in front of players. That's the only explanation.
Also, it might have been the same chips from Poker Superstars 2, so they just had them and they didn't want to get rid of them. I think the blinds were like 7. The first level in season 2, they did 7.5K and 15K, so they had slightly more big blinds to start off with for one level. And this was like a hyper turbo structure. The blinds, I think, every like 20 minutes or something went up. So they after the 10K, 20K, level 2 was 15K, 30K, and then boom, if you were the button on the first 10, maybe by the time it's your first blind, you already have 10 big blinds at that point. So pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's just baffling. It's just baffling.
Yeah. And really, you can really see on display in episode 1 just how flawed this structure really is. The play is so fast. There's no real move. There's no real space to really kind of play any real poker, any high level poker. Everyone's just kind of going all in, blinding down, going all in, busting, whatever. And by the time it gets to heads up play, there's only 18 big blinds in play at the entire table. Sfandiari kind of rules the world for most of this heat and takes it down. But I mean, 18 big blinds when heads up play begins, and the blinds reach 75K and 150K by the very end, and there's only 1.8 million at the table to begin. So that's about like 12 big blinds by the end. It's pretty embarrassing.
It really is. I mean, yeah, just to give you an example of a hand, I mean, Tilly has ace-3 of diamonds, raises to 60K, Hashim calls. Tilly gets 2 pair, bets 100K, Hashim folds. I mean, these hands just happen so quickly. Really nothing that's surprising. They try to kind of hype up Jennifer Tilly like, oh, she's being aggressive. She's turning her table image around. But I think it's a strategy that anybody could pick up on. And if anybody else were in her shoes, you would do that too. It's very odd. And then the players who are just kind of sitting back, waiting to pick up hands, obviously blind down, and then they bust out and they're barely in the coverage. I mean, Cindy Violette gets nothing. Like, she's just in the background. You see her fold until she busts with ace-7. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it's funny. This was an invitational, so you had to be invited to join. And I feel like if some amateur would join here, they would have a pretty good chance. They'd have an equal chance because it's really a shove fest. And so it always makes you wonder, like it's an invitational because they wanted to hide the fact that the structure was so bad that they didn't want like an average Joe to come in and like win the whole thing because he would just have to hope that Ace King holds up against two queens. We could have done okay in this probably. I mean, there's just no room to be outplayed really. Either you hit the flop or you don't. I mean, it's pretty insanity. For the most part, the culture of this league, it really felt that if you finish in the top three, that was considered a win.
Right.
Because the structure, if you get sixth or fifth, 0 or 1 points, you're really, you're in an early hole early on. And so I would have been happy with, third place or better, obviously. I mean, 5 points times 25 points. The unwritten rule of these leagues was like 19, 20, 21 points was kind of that magic number you wanted to get over. Because again, you're not trying to finish in the top half of the league. It's the top 2/3.
Right.
And so if someone stacks up, a couple of fifth or sixth place finishes, you're going to be pretty comfortable with getting, 5 points, 5 points, 5 points. So that's kind of the line that you're trying to reach there. And I always kind of referred to these leagues as kind of like the main event winners were always kind of cursed, like the recent ones,
Yeah.
Moneymaker, Raymer, and Hash. And they're kind of like they just always run into bad luck. And this is again right coming off of their wins in that middle of that decade in the 2000s, where that was the most recently. So that kind of continues here as Joe Hashem gets the bagel. It's not called a bagel in this show, but I'm going to call it a bagel anyway. And Esfandiari kind of, reverses the script from the season 2 where he had gotten last place and gets 10 points when he beats Tilly in heads-up play.
Yeah, I mean, nothing much to talk about. I mean, Esfandiari, who, at this point was especially very chatty and outgoing. Nothing really exciting in terms of the table talk. I mean, it is kind of funny to see, him turn toward where Phil Locke is standing and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna bust your girlfriend," stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, things just kind of hands play themselves. That's really all there is to say about it.
Exactly. Intermixed is a few interviews here and there, kind of like how we would see for the main event or whatever, which is pretty standard, in any sort of poker television anyway, where it's one player talking about how I think I'll do in this league or how I did last year, I'll do better this year or whatever, kind of standard stuff. And maybe we'll talk about some other player maybe here and there. Nothing revolutionary, not to mention, of course, the Golden Nugget spotlight each episode. And again, episodes 1's problems are carry on to episode 2, where the action is arguably even faster than episode 1, with even more all-ins. But it's really, again, it's just shove fold or shove call poker.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of 3x versus pre-flop in those first couple levels, and then either someone re-raises over them or everyone folds. I mean, that's pretty much the action. The actual players we see, I like seeing them on TV. They're, these are guys I like watching, but there's just not. Again, when the structure of the league is so flawed to begin with, it's really hard to kind of spin it into something positive when the action is so monotonous.
Yeah, I mean, looking at my notes right here, if I'm looking at this correctly, there are only 2 hands where nobody shoves. Only 2. There's one at the beginning with Greenstein raising to 60K and it folded around. Mm-hmm. And then Elliot was like got a walk with pocket kings. So he probably would have shoved with kings had somebody called him. So every single other hand, somebody shoves, and sometimes it folds around, sometimes it gets through, whatever. But it's just like, it's ridiculous. These guys can't play poker. I mean, all these people, Ivy, Greenstein, Brunson, they know how to work with stacks of different sizes. It would be interesting to see them really play this out. And we don't get that opportunity at all, not one iota.
And I think it's important to note that even for all these players, it's their first heat. So really the league considerations aren't really at work yet. Those usually take place maybe when you're playing 5 heats, maybe in your 3rd heat is when the board starts to kind of shape up a little bit. Even then that might be considered, that might be a little bit early to say that. Because there are 20 heats really until maybe heat 12. It's hard to kind of see the putty kind of shaping up into what the final 16 is going to look into. So really, that's not present when you're watching this to start off with. And the only hand really that I thought was amusing was there was a Barry Greenstein shove of ace-3 against Shulman's pocket aces. The board runs out 3-3-4, giving Greenstein trip threes, and then the case ace hits the river. So that was, arguably the craziest one-outer of this entire league that I watched here. But even then, it's like, it's, oh no, he's not going to get, that many points in this first heat. No big deal there. It's not going to change the league or the standings much anyway. And episode 3 is when Annie Duke actually joins the booth.
Mm-hmm.
And this is maybe arguably the first heat where maybe the structure starts to play a bit more into the gameplay a bit. I mean, but even then, that's just kind of that's pushing it a little bit. And Annie Duke doesn't really add much of a new dynamic into the booth. That she just kind of chimes in with the hands as Lederer talks about them and stuff. So it's not like a Lon and Norm dynamic or anything. Nothing really. It's just kind of 3 people in the booth, not 2.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't, the only thing of note that I can think of that she adds is after the Golden Nugget promo, she says, "I'm hungry for one of those pastries now." That's about it. I mean, yeah, and then I mean this episode again, it's just like the other two. There's less shoving, so that's nice. But still just, a lot of big raises and folds and, King Jack, Ace 4, pocket 5s, hands that just kind of play themselves. At a table where you have Gus Hansen, who's known for being, super crazy player, plays any 2 hands. I mean, he really just doesn't do that at all. You have Phil Hellmuth, who's Phil Hellmuth, and he's just not really himself. He's not really as outgoing and vocal as he previously is. It's just a shame. I mean, they're just handcuffed by the structure.
I mean, there was a little Hellmuth interview where he discussed his kids and his kids seeing him on TV. That was kind of amusing, I guess, because he doesn't really talk about his kids too much on any of his interview content on poker television. So that was kind of cool. But again, it's just not much to hang your hat on. I mean, there's not really anything that I'm like, wow, I gotta watch that again, or that I gotta show you this now, because every now and then I'll text you after I'm watching something like, oh my god, did you see that? That was awesome. I didn't do that at all for any of this, so unfortunate. There was a heads up play. Hellmuth loses a big hand after he has 2 9s against Mike Sexton's 2 deuces, and he flops a set against Hellmuth. That was kind of funny, I guess, but. Otherwise, I mean, but when your heads up in these heats, you're happy whether you win or lose. You're getting a lot of points, and obviously the $10,000 helps as well. But I mean, it's still a win in most people's books anyway. When you're playing, the long term game, you're not too caught up on if it's not game over if you lose in that heads up spot.
Yeah, I mean, something that we haven't mentioned yet as well is that each and every episode plays all the way through the heat. Mm-hmm. So it happens very, very fast, and there's very little time to let table dynamics and table talk settle, and you don't really get a sense of how they're learning and improving over time. So, when you get to the Hellmuth Sexton heads up, you're just not sure how these two guys are reading each other, or what exactly is going through their mind when, Sexton decides to shove with deuces and Hellmuth snap calls him with 9s. Is that an easy call for him to make? Is that there's just none of that, which is just very disappointing.
And even episode 4, which for me had my favorite roster of these 4 heats to start off with. You had Negreanu, you got Raymer, you got Moneymaker, you got Matisow. It's pretty cool. Eric Lindgren and Ted Forrest round up the 6 there. And again, there's really almost no poker on display, if that makes sense. You wouldn't learn anything from watching this. You would just think, well, if you have 10 blinds, everyone's got 10 blinds. If you shove, it's worth it because either you win the blinds or you have 2 live cards against whatever they have. I mean, it's just there's nothing. There's no high level poker. There's no anything that really you wouldn't see at some Thanksgiving family poker game when you'll have 5 chips in front of you at all times. You're just like, whatever. And Matisow, he talked about Daniel was talking a little bit. That was kind of entertaining, I guess. But them doing their thing, which we didn't really see much of everybody else in the earlier heats. So maybe it's my favorite episode of the 4, which is kind of pushing it. But I mean, it's just when you're watching these would air every week. You'd get 1 episode for 5 days in a row.
Right.
And it's just kind of after laundry TV or after school you're tired watching some TV or whatever, just mindless, brainless TV, and it's reflected in the quality of poker play on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, they keep Ted Forrest just makes a very unusual call with pocket 4s when Raymer shoves when he has trips, and Forrest limps with pocket 4s. Raymer checks in the big blind with king deuce. Forrest makes it 20K after the flop, and then Raymer shoves. I mean, on a paired board and somebody shoving into your very small bet of 20K, this has to be trips. It cannot be aces, pocket aces, maybe. I don't know. What are you doing with 4s and Forrest calls? And again, it's one of the problems of we don't know the table dynamics here. When Forrest says, "I think I got the best hand, Greg," why is he thinking that? Was there hand before that Raymer played aggressively? I mean, it's the third hand we see in this coverage. So
because of the structure, they don't really skip all that many hands.
Yeah.
Because it just happens so fast. These heats, I swear, they could have filmed like 5 heats in like one day, and probably not broken a sweat because they flow by so quickly. Even when heads up play maybe gets a little bit later in the structure than other heats. And I should also mention that whenever the chip counts are shown, it's like a picture of the player, like and then their name and their chips. But when it gets to heads up, there's like a little like cardboard cutout like animation of these guys like shuffling like cards like or failing. So like Hellmuth like drops the cards at one point or something crazy. And they cut to these so many times. I mean, the chip counts alone, and like they'll play one hand heads up, show the chip counts, come back, one hand heads up, commercial break, show. It's just mind-boggling how boring it got. And I'm surprised as a young kid I ever enjoyed season 2 because this was just a snooze fest. I found all these episodes on dailymotion.com. You can search up Poker Superstars season 3 and find the whole thing on there for free if you want to watch it. I don't recommend it, but if you want to watch with us as we rewatch, that's great. And I was happy I could speed this up at 2x speed because I was just so eager to get to the good stuff in Premier League. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't recommend this show at all. I mean, even if you're like a hardcore poker fan, completionist, 15 bigs to start each episode. I mean, what else is there? There's nothing more to say other than that.
And then like 3 hands in, they have 10 bigs. I mean, come on.
Just crazy.
And even then, if like the Gus Hansen all every hand pre-flop, that's heat number 20. That's the last heat, and so that finally gets into this player is now knocked out. This player is now in. That's kind of cool if you had stuck through this entire sludge fest and watched all 20 heats. That would maybe be mildly amusing to watch. But even then, you have to watch 15 hours of some of the most boring poker on television I've ever seen to get there. And I'm not sure if it's worth the payoff. So to each his own, I guess. And then the playoffs are another good like 12 or 15 episodes after that. So even then, yeah, and so even the heat stuff isn't even all that essential. It's like some people watch a sports playoffs season but skip the regular season. It's kind of the same thing. Maybe skip the regular season and watch the playoffs if you care that much. Otherwise, it's your funeral.
Yeah, and then I think the winner got like $400,000. Was that right at the end?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
not even that huge of a prize. I mean, it's
$400,000. It's 1/3 of the buy-in money, and obviously they probably they won some money along the way to get to that point. But still, it's just not all that exciting.
Yeah, I mean, second place gets 140,000. Like that's a pretty weird drop off. Yeah.
And so honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if this show was canceled because of its boring nature. Although I think it's really because of Black Friday in 2007 coming around the year after. That's my best guess.
Yeah, I think so.
But let's shift gears because a far superior and far more entertaining show would be the Party Poker Premier League, which lasted all of 7 seasons. Each season would change the location. Obviously the set was different. The look and feel was different here and there. Jesse May in the booth, very solid announcer, I must say. And one of the trademarks of the show would be the rotating second member in the booth, which would be one of the players in the league, which was a really cool idea. And season 7, though, they had, each year to year they make different changes, and so they kind of had what they thought was the most perfected, slightly flatter structure of the points given out in each heat. It was $125,000 to buy in. They had 12 players, which was, I think sometimes they had 16, but this particular league they had 12. Invitation basis only, and they would all play 4 heats each. So that meant that there were a total of 6 heats, which is kind of interesting how few that kind of works out too, because they would play an 8 max as opposed to a 6 max, which adds a whole another level of difficulty to avoiding getting the bagel. And you're really trying to put yourself in a spot to make the final table, where the top 4-point earners would guaranteed make the final table based on their points, and then the middle 4 would play in the playoffs. So they'd play heads up, and the 2 winners would form the last 2 members of the final 6 at the final table.
Yeah, kind of like a wild card spot in the NFL where like, the division leaders automatically make it in, but the other two spots kind of have to play, more games in order to make it in, which I really like. I mean, I think it adds a little bit, it, gives more opportunities for players who, maybe didn't do so well to make it into the game. It adds a little bit more tension. And then heads up is always fun to watch. So it's a good season.
And they would actually have exactly 50 points per heat. So with 6 heats, that's 300 points to be won in total.
Mhm.
And first place gets 14 points, all the way down to 8th place, last place getting the bagel or 0 points. The bagel being name dropped many, many times as instead of saying 0, which I kind of liked actually.
Yeah, I didn't mind it.
And 300,000 chips at the start of each heat, which is kind of amusing how it's exactly the same as Poker Superstars. And the blinds, thank you God, begin at 1,000 and 2,000 with a 500 ante for the whole table, which means they actually have some big blinds to play with. And as opposed to a timed level, they would play 21 hands per level, which is kind of a unique number, 21. A little surprised by maybe, I don't know, 7 times 3, 7 season 7, I don't know. And each heat gets 3 full episodes to breathe and sort of develop, which was, I think, a fantastic choice.
Absolutely. I mean, it really gives you time for the players to talk to each other, to get to know each other. But also, I mean, we can see narratives building a little bit better. Who's playing what hands? The hand selection, I mean, is night and day in comparison to what we saw with Poker Superstars, where we're getting 5-3 suiteds in the mix, we're getting Queen 6 suiteds in the mix. So these players are really they're here to win, they're here to play. It's also one of the benefits about being in season 7 in comparison to season 3 that there's a bit more of a reputation to the Premier League. Everybody's here to really win, and there's a lot of money and prestige at stage versus like who cares about winning Poker Superstars and $400,000? There's more here.
And each point that a player won would give them back $2,000. So if you won, 10 points, that's 20,000 back from your original buy-in. And another regular feature was the leaderboard, both the chip counts in the heat, and then the leaderboard showing all the points totals for all the players in the league at that time. And the actual 12 players, a very high quality lineup here. And there's kind of a theme as a mixture of the old guard against the new players, new to the Premier League, not new to poker necessarily. So the 12 players being Dan Shack, Jason Koon, Phil Locke, Brian Rast, Vanessa Selps, Scott Siever, Jeff Gross, Dane Coleman, Sorel Mizzi, Svan Diari, Dan Jungleman, and Jonathan Duhamel.
Yeah, it's a good mix of players that you're not just going for, Hellmuth and Negreanu, that there's people in there that, again, I think the average poker viewer would recognize, but they're not like household names necessarily, which is nice.
Yeah. And so each heat would mix up like how many knockouts are in the heat, because some heats play out very differently. Everyone plays tighter, no one busts out until the later levels. So, what you wouldn't necessarily have, 1/3 of the hands in, have, half a table gone by then. You might have only one bust out or maybe no bust outs by the episode's end. And again, much more so than Poker Superstars because of the nature of the structure. There's so many decisions on based on how many points you've already played, how many more heats do you have, who you're in a hand against, how do I play this? Do I want to risk a flip right now? Does winning a flip here really double my chance to earning points? Is it just more kind of like, what do I do relative to other stacks? And so there's so much more to watch. And also the booth kind of chimes in with those same considerations because you have, Jesse, who's impartial, and then you have maybe Brian Rast, who did poorly in one heat and is talking about who he wants to do well, and so he's like, "Yay, do that," or "Don't do that," or "This is good for me, this is bad for me." So there's a lot more levels to it when you're watching and listening to the action.
Yeah, absolutely. And then picking Phil Locke is just always a good choice as a commentator. He's very funny, and he has a good rapport with the other commentator. And it really does work. And the production values also for this episode are a lot better than in Poker Superstars. They have a better lighting setup. The table looks better in the background. They have it in a casino in Montreal of all places, and you can see sort of other people playing in the background. At one point, they even mentioned that they were the last table playing in the casino for the night. Everybody else had cleared out, which is fun. They have Kara Scott standing out in the snow in Montreal, which is kind of funny. There's just little touches here and there, and interesting graphics. Sort of this like grunge sort of style graphics and music and stuff that just sort of add a little bit more to the show than you had in Poker Superstars.
Yeah, and some of the bits you might have is just highlighting someone. It will show someone's like achievements, like what got them into the league, basically, and then an interview with them. Or there'll be something called player on player, where a bunch of players discuss one particular player's like reputation or style or their expectations against playing them. And so that's kind of cool. And then also there's this thing called Premier League Memories, where they'll kind of do a quick montage of a previous season of Premier League that might show some of the loudest banters and then the eventual winner. So that's kind of cool if you didn't want to, rewatch that whole season, and you could at least say, oh, okay, this person won, and that those players are the ones who lost to them. So there was that too.
Yeah.
And so again, like I have actual highlights for these episodes, like actual hands that are fun to watch because there's a lot of crazy. Each episode you're gonna find 2 or 3 crazy hero calls or folds or bluffs or bust outs that are just run outs, and again, it's just a lot of fun to watch these, even if this is almost a decade old by this point. And I enjoyed every single episode that I've watched from this season.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a few little problems, like, the intros for each episode were a little long. I kind of wish they got into the action sooner. Some segments are naturally better than others. Some interviews are naturally better than others. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of really good poker play on display. Dan Coleman folding ace king when, Gross has tricks with ace five of all hands. Just a lot of really good, solid poker play. And again, as I mentioned before, hand selection's a lot different here. You have Jack 9 going up against Ace King. You've got 8-5 going up against Ace Queen, which is always just kind of fun to see somebody play a small hand against a big hand.
Yeah, and that happens a lot, especially from the big blind. And one thing I did note was the ante structure was actually pretty aggressive, where at one point the blinds in level 2 are 2K, 4K, and the ante is 1K, so half of the small blind. And so you really can't sit around for too long. I mean, you can for levels 2 and 1 and 2. The booth often kind of refers to the 3K, 6K level as kind of like the action level, where usually a couple bust outs will take place, and that's not always the case. Sometimes things kind of take longer than that. But again, for each of these heats, it really feels like each player kind of has a narrative to them. Like this player was doing great, lost a big hand, and is now gone. Like there's a story, like a subplot for each character in each heat. Whereas in Superstars, really maybe 1 or 2, maybe, and that's kind of pushing it per episode. And so that's a big improvement as well. And with only 6 heats being played, so every player sits out 2 heats, but really you don't really miss any player because they're going to get shuffled back into the action for the next heat usually. So that's kind of cool to have that. And so each heat has a good roster because it's a very short cast of characters. So no matter what, you're going to have your favorite player probably in the mix in that heat.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really refreshing structure. And it really, again, just gives everybody a lot of opportunity to breathe. Hands also don't just, they're not just quick. A lot of hands make it to the river, actually. I mean, it go all the way to the end. And, you see players reacting to hands that are being exposed, and other players will chime in with their comments. It has this very collegiate feel to it. That's very nice.
And speaking of collegiate, we kind of have the hilarious frat boy energetic love of Jeff Gross on display. He's just kind of, whether he's on the table or in the booth, he kind of has this funny, half sarcastic, half cocky, but not too cocky attitude. He's kind of acts how I wish Alex Keating did, where he's joking but not at anyone's expense really, where he's just kind of talking more about himself than anybody else, so that he's not being that guy at the table. Yeah. And it's funny, the 2 players in this roster of 12 that I probably knew the least or didn't know from other programs was Sorel, Mizzi, and Jeff Gross. And they're kind of the top 2 this entire season. So it's kind of funny how that worked out because I know the other 10 relatively okay otherwise. And so it was kind of an ironic sort of outcome for these to go. And again, we're only discussing the first 4 really here, but really a running theme in this whole Premier League is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Where after those first 2 heats, the guys in the top stay up there and never look back, and the ones at the bottom can barely scrounge for 2 more points here and there. So it's kind of funny how that worked out. And so this first heat, well, as I said, everyone kind of has a story to them. But the irony here is the night that I watched episode 2 of Premier League. Is an episode where Jason Koon gets just super unlucky and ends up busting despite having 80-20 favorite in 2 different hands, and that was the same night as High Stakes Duel Hellmuth versus Jason Koon.
That's
It was,
funny.
it was kind of like a decade apart karmic balancing that night for him in the poker world for me.
Yeah, I mean, keep talking about the narratives here. So, spoiler alert for this: Gross wins the first heat, and
Yes.
his sort of narrative is tight is right, and it's just so funny to hear Phil Locke like almost exasperated that Gross actually manages to pull it off, and be Dan Coleman heads up. Dan Coleman was a heads up specialist of all people.
Right.
I mean, it's just wonderful to see this narrative just kind of wax and weave. And you don't really notice it until the end, which is what makes it effective. Like I had no idea that he was going to win, so that was very nice. I thought Coleman was going to win, but
Yeah. Yeah. So again, that first heat is very entertaining, and again, you get a taste of everyone's game to start off with, and episode 2 gives us the other couple of players that weren't really in heat 1, because obviously only 8 players out of 12 can be in there, and so we get a taste of everybody, and it's kind of the Phil Locke goes micro crazy all episode long, and again, that's one of the recurring things. It's just his play is so bonkers, and it actually works out for him in the key spots more than it doesn't, ironically. And again, that happens in episode 4 here in the first part. And Jeff Gross coming off of this high in that win in Heat 1, he's in the booth to comment on all this. So again, he's like in a good mood the entire season because he's just ahead in the scoreboard, and he can just sort of joke around. And his commentary is not great, but it's a great energy to it, so which kind of compensates for that sometimes.
yeah, and just the two of them ripping on Phil Locke as he screwed around with 10-8 suited, raising to 4.5K. Locke calling a raise from Jungle Man with King Deuce suited. I mean, it's just hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good, and I thought that actually the overall narrative of Heat 2 was even better than Heat 1. At one point, Joe gets knocked down to one big blind, 12,000 chips, and then he runs it up to 900,000. He was, one big blind of 6 left. He finishes in third, which is, pretty incredible. And one other note is that Duhamel was kind of the hometown hero, being from Canada. And so he was kind of like the local hero, I guess you could say, of the pact here. And again, so we're kind of not covering each individual highlight because there's just so many. If we discuss each great hand, almost every single hand, even the forgettable ones, are fun to watch. I mean, in this structure with these guys talking the table, there's never a dull moment.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to mention is just the very subtle tension between Jungleman and Seaver the whole time. Like, there's even an interview toward the beginning where Jungleman's like, I hope I'm on good terms with Seaver, but there's this like just needling back and forth between the two of them. Like Seaver will tell Jungle while he's talking to somebody else that it's his turn to make his move. It's just funny. It's really funny.
Yeah, and so I feel like if you were to take all of the hands in these episodes and analyze who got the most unlucky, I think the universal consensus would be Seaver and Selps get the most unlucky.
Yeah.
And the difference is Seaver manages to play himself out of that deficit in his first couple of heats to kind of not be totally dead after getting a bagel in the first heat. And Selps just never kind of gets any breaks at any point in time, and stays they call it the elimination zone, the 4 spots that will miss the playoffs and won't make it on to the next phase. And so, yeah.
And Koon gets unlucky. Let's be honest here. I mean, 18 squared, 18% squared is all you got to say. I mean, ugh, gross.
And so again, there's so many Phil Locke highlights I have. There's the infamous hand where Locke gets makes a straight with 4 deuce into Seaver's 3 aces. There's the match, and in the same match, he gets lucky twice against his Fondiari to double up through him when his Fondiari had the overwhelming favorite hand when it was like 3 and 4 handed or whatever. It's just there's so many bangers in this mix here, and I was so thrilled that after being just bored out of my mind of Superstars, that Premier League lived up to the hype in my head and was this entertaining for this many episodes.
It's the Seaver Locke hand is just so funny when Seaver turns his cards over because he's convinced he's won, and then he just sees Locke's hand. So good,
great stuff. And so and it also helps that there's no like villains in this field. Everyone's for the most part likable. Would be approachable in a poker table to enjoy some cards with. And so it's there's one big happy exclusive poker family.
Exactly. I would recommend watching it. Yeah, it's on YouTube, so you can go watch it for free. It's a lot of fun.
I think the first couple of Premier Leagues are maybe a little bit rough. So it's a little too dated for me. But I think there were six maxes back then. I think the eight max makes a big difference because, a is there's more time for the table to breathe. The action gets a little bit. You can fold a bit longer and not feel like you're just flipping early like in Superstars. And yeah, I'm very happy we watched this. I would put this maybe even the A tier if we were gonna put this in a tiering. I put this in the A tier and I'd put in the D tier Superstars. So
same here, absolutely.
and I think I saw a news report today that the official investigation on Robbi Lew was completed, and they didn't find anything that was considered evidence of cheating or anything. So I guess she's kind of exonerated in a very unofficial way. I mean, even investigation by who exactly and by what basis? I don't know. I feel like that's going to be a conspiracy theory for forever, probably.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm convinced she didn't do anything.
Same.
I think Edelstein just, he's stressed out over the hand. He just misread it. But yeah, I think it was an internal casino investigation or something.
Yeah.
It's just so ridiculous to think that she cheated, especially when you put into context the other hands that she was playing in the other sessions. She screwed up. I mean, that's essentially what happened with the jack hand. I think she misread her hand, and then her explanations after the fact were her trying to save face and cover up at that moment. That's it.
And then also, I mentioned earlier the whole Hellmuth versus Jason Koon showdown. I missed the live feed of that event, and I just ended up kind of skimming through it. And Hellmuth loses, which is I always went for Hellmuth.
Right.
So it's kind of a shame, and it sounded like he kind of got run over pretty strong. So that's not so fun. A lot of it, even some of his wins, are often pretty back and forth. So this wasn't really the case this time. So that's unfortunate. But good for Koon. As the stakes keep doubling, the money is getting up there. 1.6 million each to the next level. That's going to be crazy. Whoever ends up playing him, if it'll be a rematch or somebody else. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Koon's a great player. I mean, as he just got unlucky in these episodes we just saw. So, good for him that he won against Hellmuth. Obviously, they'll keep playing, and I don't mind seeing a new fresh blood in there. I mean, if Hellmuth wants to keep playing against other players, that's totally cool. But if Koon manages to get Hellmuth out, it would also be nice to see somebody else try to challenge him. So,
and again, whoever joins against Koon has to win 2 matches in a row. So you have to commit to both the 1.6 and the 3.2. So that's a tough ask for anybody.
Quite right, yeah.
Other than that, I know that the Mind Sport Olympiad has updated. Anything you want to talk about that there?
Yeah, I mean, bear with me on this one because there's a lot of new developments. So again, just to remind everybody, the Grand Prix, which is the online event, starts on January 27th. That's on a Friday, and it goes all the way to Sunday, March 12th, 2023. And in addition to poker, they are doing chess, Settlers of Catan, backgammon, Go, Seven Wonders, Dominion, Othello, a bunch of different games. I don't know if they're doing a creative thinking event or not. But anyway, a lot of different stuff, and y'all can compete as many events as your schedule allows. What they have done is they have changed how the meta event, which is across all categories, is being arranged, and then also how each category is being done. So what they're doing for the meta event, which is again across all categories, not just poker, is having a set of what's called premier events. And these events will count toward the overall championship. And apparently it's only happening within 7 days. So you can kind of just get those events done and then move on if that's all that you want to do. And then, as I mentioned, poker has its own category. There's also abstract games and board games. I think Catan's its own category, and there's like 10 different variations or chess or something. I don't know how these games work. I've only ever played poker. But how they're doing it in terms of each category is they have these formulas that determine, based on your ranking, how many points you got. So it's no longer first place gets 40 points, second place gets 20 points. It's 100 times n plus 5 divided by n plus 6 times n minus p divided by n minus 1. So if you could tell me what that means, that'd be greatly appreciated. In other words, they're basing the points off of how many players there are. So if you get 49th place out of 100, you're still going to get points for the event, and that's slightly less than somebody who gets 48th place, 47th place, and so on. Which personally I don't mind. I don't know if they are planning on doing open tournaments. They've had back in 2020 they had tournaments that were open to the public and anybody could sign up. So I would prefer a format where you're getting points based off of this formula if they're going to do that. But for a smaller field, I'm just not quite sure how that's going to work. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I don't think they've quite announced how they're going to be doing that yet. I don't really care either way. In terms of who wins each category, it's your best 5 event scores. So it's not just the total number of points, which I actually do prefer because some players may not be able to play all tournaments, right? I was able to play all tournaments last time, and that was a big factor as to why I was able to get 3rd place. So I don't mind that. Yeah, I mean, again, great. I really recommend it. Great run event. Looks like they're going to be announcing the full schedule soon. For the premier tournaments, there are 3 poker tournaments that count toward, again, the Grand Prix Meta Championship. That's Horse, which is taking place on February 1st. Omaha Heads Up, which is taking place on February 13th. That's a Monday. And then regular Texas Hold'em, which is taking place on March 11th. And then the other premier tournaments are Catan, Othello, English Draughts, Chess 10-5. I don't know what that is. 11-point backgammon, etc. So that's just a general idea of what to expect.
All right. Well, again, we'll discuss it more as we get closer to those months next year. And I guess the question I wanted to ask you, Sam, is that obviously I would have loved to have had a poker Premier League season 8, which hasn't come to fruition in 8 years. I guess on the same vein of league poker, what is your ideal structure? Do you think would make for the best possible league if you were going to design your own?
Ooh, that's a fun one. I mean, I like a format where, again, it's not like first place has 40 points, second place has 20 points.
Yeah.
Because then you're just encouraging people to play for the top prize. Whereas, if you have a flatter point structure, you have a little bit more incentive. If you get 3rd, 4th, it's not the end of the world. I mean, I really like how the Premier League does it, that you have multiple heats, different combinations of player each time. Yeah, I mean, and I like the idea of top 4 players automatically get to the final table. Maybe not have the final table, maybe have like a semifinal in there as well. That way, you still have to work a little bit hard in order to get to the end. And then, a couple of wild card slots to decide who else gets to do it. Maybe have, 6, 8 max to begin with, and then maybe an 8 max final table instead of a 6 max. I think
it might even be cool if you had like a mixed game league where you had you played maybe 2 heats of Hellmuth, 2 of Omaha, 2. Maybe, I mean, obviously that'd take a lot of commitment for everyone to have to be in agreement there. But I think that'd be kind of cool to have different heats to play different games, and so you kind of have a well-rounded sort of. I played well in this game and did well, and I did poorly in that one, but here I am. And then you didn't have the final table to be horse. You had the 5 heats be HORSE, and then have the final table be horse. It'd be kind of funny.
Yeah, WSOP, have a special league tournament where you have to play multiple. That would be funny.
Cool. It'd be a little bit. It'd be a 6-day tournament. You'd play each day, Hold'em, Omaha, Raz, Stud 8, and then horse at the final table. It'd be pretty fun.
I'd be game for that. I think that'd be funny.
But I like a lot of what Premier League does. If I was going to improve Superstars on a basic bare bones structure, I would obviously have maybe the blinds be 5K, 10K, please, and then maybe have 2 episodes per heat. That way you have more time for play to develop. But even then, that's pushing it. So Premier League's the way to go, I think, for that formula, though.
I think so. But maybe 15 big blinds is a little too much. Maybe you have like 7 big blinds. I mean,
and then maybe have an ante in there too, so that way you have 1 orbit of chips to begin with.
Or how about you just have all ins? Just all ins.
All in the first hand, winner takes all. Someone said if they did that in the World Series. The flipping goes. Oh well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that just about covers our talk here. Thank you for listening, everybody. As we approach the holiday season, we hope you all have a happy, not too cold holiday with your families. Hopefully the poker world will continue to find new ways to entertain us, and we'll see what happens. We're still open to discuss what our next challenge or rewatch should be. So we're always listening for your suggestions.
Yep, and we're still open to interviews. Again, thank you to everybody who's done an interview. I mean, the Philip Hellmuth interview has been doing very well on YouTube, and people have been sharing it. Feel free to share it with your friends and family. And if, again, you're interested in coming on the show, it doesn't have to be like an hour-long formal interview. If you want to ask us a question, if you want to talk about anything we've talked about previously, if you have a story you want to share, we're happy to have you on. And then obviously, like, any suggestions you have as to content you want us to see us talk about, or suggestions you have to improve our content, let us know, and we'll try to make those edits.
Yeah, that's it, guys. Until next time, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, and enjoy your poker on TV.
And go to the Golden Corral and
Nugget.
Nugget.
All right, guys. Bye.